Hey everyone, welcome to Azure Cosmos DB Conf. I'm Gal, and today I'm presenting flexible, integrated, and cost-effective Azure Cosmos DB for MongoDB vCore, a brand new offering. So first off, my name is Gal Levy, and I'm a product lead here on Azure Cosmos DB, and I'm based in New York City. It's nice to meet you all. Today, we'll be talking about Azure Cosmos DB for MongoDB. So first, let's start with a quick overview of what Azure Cosmos DB for MongoDB is. As a developer, I want to get all of the benefits of Azure Cosmos DB, but I might already have skills using MongoDB, or I might already have apps that use MongoDB, and I don't want to have to change them. That's where Azure Cosmos DB for MongoDB comes in. Azure Cosmos DB for MongoDB allows you to use Cosmos DB as if it were a MongoDB database. This allows me to leverage my skills and my apps the same way they were before and get all the benefits of Azure Cosmos DB. So for example, Cosmos DB for MongoDB is compatible with MongoDB's apps, tooling, drivers, and SDKs. So it works just the way you expect it. The second thing here is choose your architecture. This is the brand new part. We first have request units, which you might already be familiar with, but now we also have vCores. Lastly is the native Azure integrations. This is a big one because as a developer, I don't want to have to build or maintain integrations with my other Azure services. I want them to be taken care of automatically. Azure Cosmos DB is a native Azure service, so this does this automatically for me. You can go to that link down there to check out all of our integrations. Let's talk a bit more about the two architectures. The first one is request units. This is the one you might already be familiar with. This is where you pay for throughputs as well as consume storage. The new architecture we're announcing is vCore, the brand new architecture. This is where you pay for instances and disks. This might sound familiar because you're accustomed to this, doing so on-prem or in IaaS or in other MongoDB services. This is just the same way. You pay for instances and disks, and high availability is optional if you'd like it. Let's dive a bit deeper into Cosmos DB for MongoDB vCore. As I mentioned, this is a native Azure service that's integrated with the Azure platform, meaning the resource management, the efficiencies of using native Azure tooling are all deeply integrated, and you benefit from all of them as a developer. You enjoy the peace of mind of not having to support or build these integrations, as everything is backed by one single support team. Second is flexibility for you as a developer. With the vCore offering, you can scale vertically as well as horizontally very well, meaning that you need no shard key initially. You can scale vertically by a lot until your database surpasses terabytes, which covers many, many use cases. Second is pricing is based on very familiar concepts, such as vCPUs and disks. So it's very easy to compare and understand when you're coming over to our service, how to use it and how to price it correctly. There are also other benefits, such as no limits on collections and many other benefits. But ultimately, this is a familiar architecture that really makes sense for developers, and it's very easy to get accustomed to. Lastly, this is a fast solution that just works really, really well. Fast from the perspective of incredible performance by being based on Azure Cosmos DB, and fast from how easy it is for you to leverage the benefits with your MongoDB skills or your MongoDB apps. It's very easy to migrate over or develop new apps here. Lastly, this is a fast solution that simply works from two perspectives. One is how fast it is to develop new apps or migrate existing apps due to the fact that you can leverage your skills that you already have or the apps that are already written in a certain way. Second is fast from a performance standpoint. This architecture is based on Azure Cosmos DB, and it's very, very fast. In addition to that, the TCO here is great because we take all the extra performance and we pass those savings directly on to you as a user. And that's it. The solution is fast and performant. It's integrated and it's flexible for developers. Let's talk about which architecture is right for you. If you're looking into running long-running aggregation queries or complex queries, vCore might be a better option compared to running short queries that require consistent performance throughout. As I mentioned before, with vCore, you're getting dedicated instances that run in a way you're accustomed to, compared to request units where you have a cloud-native multi-tenant service with instantaneous scalability. Lastly, in terms of scaling with vCores, as I mentioned earlier, you can scale up horizontally as well as vertically by a lot. With request units, you're mostly scaling horizontally by sharding, which is done automatically for you by Cosmos DB. Lastly, in terms of pricing and how you're spending, in the vCore offering, you have a consistent flat fee based on compute and based on storage. In request units, the fee is variable and it all depends on your usage and capacity model. But in general, the way it's structured is based on throughput and it's based on consumed storage. Now, I want to take a moment here and highlight a customer of ours. I want to highlight a customer of ours called Software AG. They chose to use Cosmos DB for MongoDB vCore because of its integration, high performance, and total cost of ownership. And we really thank them for having us, or for having them as a customer, and we're really excited to work with them. Now, diving a bit deeper into the total cost of ownership. Here at Microsoft, we really want you to do more with less, and that comes with giving very, very competitive pricing to ensure you can do that. That includes what you might see over there. We have a non-HA option, meaning high availability option. So you can create clusters without high availability for dev and test, for example, and those are automatically 50% off. As I mentioned, we pass all the savings directly on to you. And you can see with the different types of cluster tiers, we have many choices for you to choose from. As mentioned down below, we'll continue adding additional cluster tiers, and there's much more coming soon in terms of pricing and TCO and ways you can do more with less. So we'd love for you to get started with Azure Cosmos DB for MongoDB vCore. Please check out aka.ms/trymongovcore to get started. And now let's go through a demo. So here in the familiar Microsoft Azure portal, you can choose create a new Azure Cosmos DB resource. You go over here and you choose Azure Cosmos DB for MongoDB, just as it was before. But what's different now is you have a choice between resources. You can choose the familiar request units database account that we always had. And now in addition, we have a vCore cluster, which is in preview now. And you just click create. You select your subscription, you select your resource group. Let's choose the resource group. I'm going to select my cluster name, select my region, and I'm going to click configure. In the configuration page, I can select how many nodes I want to use. Typically, we'll start with 1 here. I can select my cluster tier from the list. I can select my storage per node. And on the right, I can see the pricing come up for the entire month, estimated cost for the month. You're paying per hour here, but you can see the cost for the entire month if you were to keep it running for the entire month. And then I can select if I want high availability. Since I'm not running in production, I'm going to leave that off and click I understand and click save. Next, I'll put my username and I'll put in a password. So next we go to review and create. You can see all the details about what I'm creating here. I'm going to click create. And that's it. The deployment will start. And in a few minutes, I'll have a brand new Cosmos DB for MongoDB vCore cluster. But to save time, let's skip to one that's already created. Here's a cluster I created earlier with all the details of what's running. As I mentioned before, this is an M40 tier with 4 vCores and 16 gigabytes of RAM. The disk size is shown here. But in addition, I can always go to scale. And if my needs ever change, I can change the cluster tier up or down. I can change the storage per node. Any cost differences will be reflected here. And I can enable or disable high availability. And by clicking save with any difference, what happens is the cluster is changed live with no downtime. All these changes are done without any downtime, and the configuration is updated. So this is very convenient for scaling up or down and really scaling to fit your workload and your workload needs. In the networking tab, you can configure firewall rules, as well as go to many other tabs you're familiar with to change the configuration or use features or integrations with your cluster. But let's connect to the cluster and use it a bit. So let's go to connection string. I'm going to copy this connection string. The important part to keep in mind is you have a user and password that you configured when you created the cluster. In order to connect to the cluster using this connection string, you need to replace the user and the password with what you used, with what you put, and then you can actually connect. So I'll copy this, and then I just want to make a point here. If you ever forget your password, you can always click reset password here in order to change it. Now let's go to Mongo shell here. I'm going to connect with a connection string. Now you can see we're connected to Mongo shell. I already have a database here pre-populated with some data. So let's do show DBs, and we want to use the demo database. Now that we're on the demo database, I'm going to run some aggregation queries to show you what's going on. But first, let's do a find. As you can see, we have a list of orders with a customer name, a status of the order, and the amount, the total amount of the order cost. We're going to run some aggregation pipeline queries here and show how this works just as if it were a MongoDB database, but we're actually using Azure Cosmos DB for MongoDB in this case. So what this one did is this sums up each customer's fulfilled order amount and sorts it. So you can see we have the total order amount by customer. We have an order count that was also summed up, and it's sorted by the highest order amount. Here is another example. This will count the fulfilled and unfulfilled orders per customer. And you can see each customer has filled orders and unfulfilled, and the counts for each of them. And lastly, this one will calculate the percentages of fulfilled versus unfulfilled orders for customers. So as you can see, Azure Cosmos DB for MongoDB vCore works just like a MongoDB database, but it's backed by Azure Cosmos DB, and it's running Azure Cosmos DB for MongoDB vCore. So very, very easy just to get started with the tools you're already familiar with, and basically take this connection string and use them with your applications and with your favorite tools. That just makes sense for you as a developer, since you already have that background in developing with MongoDB. Thank you so much for listening to this talk. We're so excited for you to try out Azure Cosmos DB for MongoDB vCore and let us know what you think. Go to aka.ms/try MongoVCore to get started. Thank you so much again, and enjoy the conference.